So we received the Ofsted call on the 7th of March, where they were telling us that we needed to have evidence of how many children have an open plan, the behaviour, any peer-on-peer abuse figures, how many referrals into MASH that we had completed, and anyone that is open to any form of plan. They wanted those figures by 8 a.m. on the first day of their visit, which is the 8th of March. Those figures were handed over. Then we had the inspector on the 8th of March meet with myself and HR, and they were looking at the single central record. They paid specific details to the governance and the teachers and any gaps that would be on the record at all. For example, one of the gaps was a member of staff that hadn't started yet, so we was just still in the process of collecting the checks and putting those in place. One of the questions that Ofsted asked was regarding low-level concerns and how do we report on that, and they wanted to see an example of how that is reported and recorded. So I was able to print off an empty spreadsheet just with the titles of the categories and hand that to Ofsted. They then gave me an example of if a member of staff had been arrested on a stag do in Benidorm, what would they need to do? How would they know what to do? So I explained that that's part of my safeguarding training with every member of staff, and they asked me to evidence that. So I was just able to print off the PowerPoint for that and share that. Ofsted shared that they had checked my website before they arrived. They said that everything was in place and as it should be, but they checked every newsletter that had been uploaded to the website, and they were even able to name our therapy dogs. So they'd done a lot of research with regards to what was on our website. They asked for an analysis of the bullying logs, where that is recorded and how it was recorded and dealt with. So they were asking for how students report. So I was able to say that we have a QR code reporting on there in every child's planner, so that if they didn't want to verbally share their concerns, they can use the app. And I was able to explain that in Key Stage 3 Year 7, from September to around October half term, we see a real increase in the app, and then as relationships have established, then we get the verbal communication of concerns raised. Ofsted then asked for the figures of home educated students. They wanted to know what the process was for anyone that was home educated, how many students they were, and where that information is stored. So I was able to explain that we use CPOMs as our recording electronic safeguarding recording device, and to share that all communication is recorded on that, so that if the child is home educated, all the information is stored on there. And then if we get a request later in years to come that they've moved to another school that holds CPOMs, that alert comes through to us, and I can share that request that actually this may be a theme that the parents remove the children from education. So they wanted that information. The inspector then asked what communication was like during lockdown. They wanted to know what our criteria was for contact and communications, where I was able to say that we communicated with all students via Teams online learning. Those that we would deem vulnerable or we hadn't been able to contact, hadn't been attending their online learning sessions, we were able to do telephone calls and then home visits where required. The inspector asked for the sexual harassment figures. So for those that had been identified as a victim or a perpetrator for sexual harassment in school, I was able to share the sexual harassment action plan with the inspector, so they could see the journey that we had been on and what we look for to educate our students and staff around that. I had recently delivered sexual harassment and peer-on-peer abuse training to all staff prior to the Ofsted visit, so that the students and staff were very comfortable when they were questioned later on the following day. During the visit, Ofsted were very inquisitive on how many students we have on roll, what the figures for midterm transfers are, and the off-roll process and how that works and where that information is recorded. So they asked for the data, which I delivered to them, and explained that it's recorded on each student's individual CPOMS file. Whilst walking around the school site, the inspector came across a year 11 girl that was at risk of a permanent exclusion. However, we put a bespoke plan in place to support that student. The student explained that they have been supported by the school and that they are happy with the education and the one-to-one learning that they were receiving. The inspector then challenged me on how do we know how that student is safe when she's not in school on her bespoke timetable, and really pushed me and urged me to explain that we communicate with home, we do telephone calls, and we pick up the student for one-to-one so that disclosures can be made if they are required. During day 2, Ofsted asked to speak to my pastoral leaders, where they tested everything that I had said the day before. So they wanted to know what communication and contact was like during lockdown, what the priorities were for the vulnerable students and how that looked like. They then asked for a group of students. Luckily, we were allowed to pick the students for this group, and it was regarding PHSE and RSE. So Ofsted asked what that looked like for students and what education they'd received within that area. They then asked what sex education the students had received and information on how they keep themselves safe, where students were able to articulate that that's fed through the PHSE and RSE curriculum. Students were also asked about the Equality Act and what that looks like and how they've learnt that and where that information is stored within schools. So students were able to say that there is posters in every classroom that identifies the Equality Act, and that they have student voice and opportunities to share that and any concerns also. And then finally, students were asked how they report concerns. So any forms of bullying, they were testing the strategies of what I had said before. So students were able to articulate that we have a QR code for them to report anonymously. They have staff and they have student voice that is collected at regular intervals throughout the year. At the end of day 2, the final part of the inspection, all members of SLT were invited in to meet with the Ofsted inspectors to get the official grading, which we weren't allowed to talk about. The Ofsted inspectors went through all the categories and feedback on which area of subjects they've seen and what would be written in the report. Then they came to safeguarding, and they just said that safeguarding was compliant, and I didn't receive any feedback for that, which I did feel slightly disappointed. Pleased that I'd got the outcome that I wanted, but I wanted something, probably a little bit more informative. However, my guard is not down at all. We had post-COVID, April 2021, a visit from Ofsted for the pilot inspection, got through that. Then the following week, I had another Ofsted call to say that they are auditing the local authority for looked after children. One of the case files that they pulled was one of my looked after children, and then I had to meet with Ofsted again and through that process. So I'm always waiting for the next call to come through and be ready and waiting.